Welcome back to Call to the Home. Today we're continuing our series on de-stressing mealtime, and we're going to speak about your fridge and freezer. Now, as we start today's episode, I will warn you ahead of time, we're going to dive just a little bit into the science of the refrigerator and freezer and what the purposes of these two parts of this appliance are. Afterwards, I'll share some tips that I have learned over the years, cooking for my family of 7, of how to de-stress mealtime with some practices, habits, and organization that you can use in your own fridge and freezer. So let's dive in. First, science. The basic idea behind your fridge and freezer is that this is an airtight unit that works to remove warmth from inside the unit, use that warmth to then boil a liquid in the condenser coil in the back of the refrigerator freezer unit, and then continue using electricity to recondense it back down over and over and over again. Most units also have a fan that blows any excess warm air that's been pulled out into the environment so that it doesn't accidentally re-warm up the unit. Crash course in how fridge and freezers work 101, your air conditioning unit likely works in much the same way. And so as we look inside this unit, the temperature settings are different for your fridge versus your freezer. You typically have a universal control panel that allows you to choose from a range of very unscientific, unspecific buttons that kind of adjust from cooler to warmer in terms of inside your fridge. This is because over time and with how much food you've got inside it, the actual temperature number may fluctuate. Number one biggest recommendation, scientifically speaking and safety for your family, is that you invest in 2 thermometers. One will always live in your freezer, and the other will always live in your refrigerator. It is not wise to just hope that it feels cold enough, to just say, well, the ice cubes are solid, so I guess we're good. Very sketchy, dangerous practices. You might accidentally make your family sick. You might allow food to spoil more quickly so that you can't use it. And as we talked about last time, we don't want to waste any of the resources that God has provided us with. So let's talk a little bit about what 2 goals do we have in putting food into our fridge and freezer. How do the temperature settings for these 2 units differ and help accomplish those goals so that I can then wisely put my food in the correct place so that I have it ready and available to me at a safe temperature that I can use it when it's time for mealtime. So, 2 goals of the refrigerator freezer unit are to slow down the action of bacteria, the reproduction of bacteria, and to slow down the oxidation. So let's talk just for a second about the science of these 2 things. First, bacteria. Bacteria are living organisms. You can see them under a very cheap, typical Walmart kids microscope. Very easy to identify them. They have specific temperatures in which they live. While if you look at all the bacteria that God has created across planet Earth, they do have ranges, different temperatures at which they can survive versus thrive versus die. However, there is an element of universality amongst them, and that certain temperature cutoffs pretty much do the same thing to all of them. The temperature cutoffs for your fridge and freezer have been designed to address the action of bacteria. Now, by happenstance, for which we thank God, those same temperatures also do something to the second process that we'll talk more about in just a minute, which is oxidation. But that's not what they were designed to do. They're designed to affect the actions of bacteria. So let's first talk about the refrigerator. Your refrigerator temperature in Fahrenheit needs to be below 40 degrees. If it is at or above 40 degrees, it is not doing what it was designed to do, and you might as well not even use it. So it is imperative that you make sure with an accurate thermometer that your refrigerator unit is cold enough. It should never, ever go above 40 degrees. The ideal setting is to keep it about 35 to 37 so that you have a big shopping day, you open the door, you as quickly as you can, put in your new foods and close the door The max it goes up to is 39, and then it cools itself back down and you're good. It is not okay to let it pop above 40 and let it stay there for more than, maybe 20 minutes at a time. Here's why. Bacteria go into a state of slowed reproduction only below 40 degrees. Again, there's a little bit of variance. Some bacteria slow a few degrees higher than that, but most of the ones, and especially the ones that are commonly found in farm animals and will be on your food, 40 degrees is the cutoff. So at 40, they are able to continue to reproduce at a rate of doubling every 30 minutes. I want you to think for a minute. You did a great job. You cleaned your food. You cooked it well. By chance contact with the air, because bacteria actually are also airborne, they're not just on surfaces, you've got one bacterial cell in your soup that you have put from leftover into the refrigerator. If the temperature is not cold enough, if it is above 40 degrees, every 30 minutes that bacterial cell doubles. So in the first half hour in the fridge, now you've got 2. 30 more minutes go by, now you've got 4. 30 more minutes go by, now you've got 8. 30 more minutes go by, now you've got 16. In 2 hours' time, you went from 1 cell of bacteria, which is an incredible underestimation, by the way. Far more cells of bacteria will be in there than 1. In 2 hours' time, you went from 1 to 16. Do you see now what's going to happen by the time you hit the 24-hour mark? You could have 1 million bacterial cells inside that container of soup now in one day, just because your fridge temperature was not cold enough. This is important. This is why in food industry and restaurants, they have inspections and there are rules and regulations regarding the temperature of things in the fridge, and they get in big trouble, perhaps even shut down, if it's not kept cold enough. So you need to do this. Now, the other thing I want to caution you against is some misconceptions about, well, what does that cold temperature do? Below 40, you are slowing, not stopping, bacterial reproduction. So hear what I'm saying very clearly. The reason why there are limits of after 3 days, this leftover should no longer be eaten. After 5 days, this leftover is no longer safe to eat is not because people are being overly cautious or fear-mongering. It is because the refrigerator, even in the 30-degree range, is only slowing, not stopping reproduction. That doubling process is continuing. It's just a lot longer than 30 minutes. How much longer specifically is going to depend on the particular strain of bacteria, but we're talking on the order of 4 to 6 hours to double instead of 30 minutes. At 5 days, it has still managed to double to several thousand, if not 100,000 cells of bacteria in that food. Which is why you'll notice eventually mold grows and things spoil in the refrigerator. The bacterial count has gotten incredibly high by the time you have noticed it has spoiled. It was high enough to make you sick long before you smell it, long before you see the discoloration. So again, I encourage you, check your temperature, follow the rules for how many days it should be eaten and how many it should not. As we talked about before, cook in smaller batches. We'll talk about in a moment. Move it to the freezer before you hit that window, and then you're good. But let's be wise about the way that we are using these units so that we don't make our families sick. That's going to cause far more stress than anything we might have saved, a few pennies here and there on using leftovers from the fridge. Now, let's talk about the freezer. How does it work to slow down bacteria? What is its cutoff temperature and why? The freezer's cutoff temperature is 0 degrees, not Celsius, Fahrenheit. That's minus 18 degrees in Celsius, well below, on purpose, the freezing point of water. If you keep it at the freezing point of water, you actually can't make ice cubes and nothing will actually freeze. It has to be much colder in order to consistently freeze it and to do so quickly enough for things to be safe. What does 0 degrees Fahrenheit mean for bacteria? At 0 degrees Fahrenheit, bacteria go into a state of dormancy. It's very much like a bear hibernating in the winter. They are not dead, very much alive, but they are asleep and therefore cannot reproduce. This is big, far different goal than what we have in using the refrigerator. The freezer will actually stop reproduction. But note what it didn't do. It did not kill any bacteria. There is no bacteria that can be killed by a home freezer. Now, if you've got liquid nitrogen laying around and you can get it to, negative couple hundred degrees, yes, you can kill a couple bacteria, not all of them, but a couple of them can be killed with that. But you don't have liquid nitrogen at home, so don't pretend that you can. When you're using your freezer, then we need to think about however many bacteria are in that food when I put it in is going to be the same amount of bacteria that are still in that food when I pull it out to thaw it. Why did I say that? Because it's very common practice, but very foolish practice, that when a leftover has hit its max time in the fridge, people just move it to the freezer. Bad idea. Unless you like getting the stomach virus. Technically not a virus, bacteria, but you know what I mean. That's what people call it. You'll be vomiting and have diarrhea for days. So, just because you escaped it a couple times doesn't mean that you have the right to tempt God by being foolish. So, whatever amount of bacteria is in it when you put it in the freezer is doing nothing to decrease that. That is why. If something is in the refrigerator after one day, if you can see looking ahead, have a little bit of foreknowledge here, that this is not getting eaten by day 3. Go ahead now at one day when there's only, 20 cells of bacteria in it. Now put it in the freezer. Because if you wait until the end, you didn't do anything. Freezing doesn't magically make it all better. It doesn't kill the bacteria, doesn't reduce the population at all. So there's reasons why there are rules and procedures for how to handle food. Now let's come back to and talk about oxidation. Again, this is not what your fridge and freezer were designed to do, but because of the temperature settings they're designed to combat for bacteria, they also have an effect on the chemical reactions that happen the moment your food is exposed to air. Now, while a creature or plant is alive, its body will naturally resist these processes, enzyme activity, oxidation, because it's alive, and by God's design, it's to stay alive. So it's continually repairing the damage that is done. Your body is doing it right now. However, the moment the animal is killed, the moment the seed is cracked open, the bean or nut is crushed, and it is then losing its protective coating, it is no longer alive to repair, it's now exposed to the air. The oxygen that is in the air, not equal to air, in air, is then going to begin a series of reactions that are collectively called oxidation reactions. If you've ever seen somebody leave a bicycle outside over time, accelerated by water, so especially when it rains, it rusts. Rust is just one of a million oxidation reactions. And so this is naturally a process God has created for good. It allows minerals and elements in the environment to be recycled back down into their base forms so they can go back into the soil, nourish plants, and enter the food chain all over again. But the goal for us as keepers of our home is that that food chain process doesn't happen before we have had a chance to eat it and benefit from the vitamins and minerals that were in the food to begin with. So, when I look at room temperature, roughly inside a house, you're looking at 70 degrees, give or take, depending on where you live and how high or low you set your heat or air, if you have it. So at this temperature, oxidation reactions and enzyme activity is pretty fast. If a food is left out on the counter, very quickly it goes stale. We're talking no covering, no protection at all, complete exposure to the air. Very quickly spoils, very quickly goes stale. Reactions happen quite fast at that temperature. When I put it in the refrigerator, I slow that reaction down. But let's be real and let's just think very simply about math for a moment. 70 degrees in my house compared to maybe 38 degrees in my refrigerator. We haven't even halved the temperature. So I want you to consider it is far more complicated than this. You'd have to work out all the chemical reaction rates and things. but we haven't even halved the temperature, so don't expect to have more than half the speed. Oxidation still happens inside your refrigerator. Why does oxidation matter? Oxidation and enzyme activity is what destroys the vitamins and nutrients in your food. So that although it may still be safe to eat, there aren't pathogens like bacteria in it that will make you sick. When you eat it, there actually isn't any nutrition left in it. And that kind of defeats the whole point, right? And so what we have to consider is another thing why it is good that God lets the bacteria keep us in check, us quickly using up that food before it is left in the refrigerator for weeks on end, is that when it's left in the refrigerator for that long, even though we may have slowed the bacteria down and we've got it at a safe level, there aren't any nutrients left for you to get when you eat it. And this is a huge crisis in America today, as well as other parts of the world that have adopted this model of eating, where our food is very devoid of nutrients. Your body's going to still feel hungry even though you've eaten the number of calories you needed for the day, because it actually is. You're starving. You don't have enough nutrients. Leaving things in the refrigerator for too long is one of the culprits. Maybe not the major culprit, but definitely one of the culprits. And let's be honest, the food doesn't taste the same the third, fourth, and fifth day. It's actually not just preference that you don't like necessarily some leftovers. You are sensing a depletion of nutrients and you don't like it because you know, even though your head maybe hasn't caught up with it, your body knows that there aren't as many nutrients in it. So we want to be wise about what we're putting in there and keeping in mind that it's only slightly slowing oxidation. Now let's talk about the freezer. 0 degrees Fahrenheit is not zero in terms of speed of reactions. Fahrenheit is not an absolute temperature scale. Kelvin is. You'd have to go to negative several hundred degrees Fahrenheit in order to hit actual zero, the actual lowest temperature that can exist in the universe. So what that means is you've definitely decreased the reaction rate quite a lot. So oxidation's, half speed, we'll just estimate, would say 35 degrees Fahrenheit, 70 to 35. Half it again if you go to 12.5 degrees. Half it again if you go to 6 degrees. So you have significantly slowed down the ability of the oxidation reactions and the enzymes to continue to destroy the vitamins and nutrients in your food. But you only slowed it down because 0 isn't the bottom. Negative several hundred degrees is the bottom. So you didn't stop it. I see this all the time. People think that if they put something in the freezer, 10 years later, it's perfectly good to eat. Safe to eat? Yes. Good to eat? No, because there's literally no nutrients left in that food. You might get a couple calories from eating it, but you might as well just go outside and chew on some grass because that's about the same level of nutrients that you're going to get here. And yes, I'm using a little bit of hyperbole, so please don't quote me on that. That's not a true science, literal, factual quote, but trying to help you understand that oxidation is not stopped by the freezer. Slowed, not stopped. Slowed way more than the refrigerator. We're talking several orders of magnitude slower, but not stopped. So let's be wise about how long we're keeping things in our freezer. It would be best practice to use things up quickly rather than long. You don't want things sitting in your freezer for a year. You can still use them. They will still have a little bit of nutrition left in them, but not much. So let's try and within a year's time, make sure things are getting used up. Now, let's talk one more thing about fridge and freezer, and then we'll jump from science to a couple of short practical tips that I have for your day-to-day practice so that you have what you need to prepare your meals. The other thing that the fridge and freezer does, and I'm going to help myself to slow down on the science of this because I get excited about it and I want to talk about all the things, is because it's lowering the temperature compared to the outdoor temperature, the air can now hold less water. If you didn't know this already, really cool things about weather. The warmer the air is, the more water that it holds. Okay, some things to get you to think about maybe I never thought of that before. If the air temperature outside is 95 degrees and it's 80% humidity, That is 1,000,000 times more water than is in air that is 55 degrees and still 80% humidity. Did you know that? The percent humidity is called relative. What is it relative to? The air temperature and how much water it can hold at that temperature. You probably knew just from working with water that hotter waters hold more things. It can dissolve more sugar when it's hot than it can when it's cold. The same is true for gases, like the air. So when the air is really warm, the humidity might be a low number, but that actually physically is a massive amount of water that is in the air. Your refrigerator and freezer are cooling the air temperature down significantly. That massive amount of water that was in the air has to go somewhere. And so depending on the way that your unit is designed, it may show as buildup frost on the sides of the freezer. It may have a dehumidifier in the back that actually pulls that moisture out and collects it, sends it through a tube. It may have a drip pan at the bottom where it catches that water. You may see it running down the sides, right? Many different options, but what you need to know is that your fridge and freezer, by design, there's no way around this because they're cooling it, are also sucking the water out of everything that you just put in there. If you don't have a way to combat that, your food is going to dry out, and that is going to further contribute to it not tasting great when you heat it back up or you go to use it in your meals. So the best way to combat that, I'll give you two actually. Best way is vacuum sealing. Not everybody has the ability to do that. You can still do a good job of preserving nutrients and quality and taste of your food without going out to buy a vacuum sealer. I'll give you a side note though. They make vacuum sealers for mason jars really cheap that work really well. So look into that. Second best, you want something that is airtight. Not just watertight, airtight. This is a little harder to test at home, but there are reasons why there's different types of plastic zip bags, some that are normal thickness and some that are freezer thickness. Do not ever think that you can get by with using a cheaper, thinner plastic bag in a fridge or freezer, and it is going to do anything near the same. You are going to have much more exposure to air, which means faster oxidation, loss of nutrients, and because it's not airtight, you're going to have a lot more loss of moisture, so it's going to dry out really badly. Use freezer thickness plastic bags, use airtight containers. I like the glass Snapware. They have the silicone gaskets on the top so that they can be airtight. A good rule of thumb is to make something that has a very strong odor. Put it in a container and seal it, and see if, while it's in your fridge or freezer, the next few times you open the door, the next day, 2 days later, you can smell it. If you can smell it, that's because particles of it are floating in the air and it is not airtight. That's all I have for today. Until next time.